Hi folks, this is Dr. P to talk about really 2 and 4 player games and uncertainty and perfect information. But the title is When Board State is Not Enough. In some games, you can look at the board and you know quite well how the game is going. Chess, checkers, backgammon, go, tic-tac-toe, mancala. Notice those are all old games, but there are newer games as well. All of those games are 2-player games with perfect information. And even with a 2-player game, you don't know the psychological state of the players. You don't know how what has gone before has affected their minds. So the board state won't necessarily tell you what's actually likely to happen. Now contrast this with diplomacy and poker, the extremes of psychological games. Even though one is very formal with its tactical system and the other is very informal. Even the end of a game can be deceptive. I remember the end of a 4-player Britannia tournament game. Red player had 8 armies. There's about 55 on the board on average in the game. And he was in 6 territories out of 37. But he won handily because of points accumulation. The state of the board at any point in Britannia does not equal the state of the game. Though a top player, if he or she looks at the score sheet as well as the board, would have recognized Red's advantage in this case. In fact, would have known that the game was already over, because at the end of the game, the other players were doing their best to pull Red back, but he had already accumulated too much of a lead. So many games are like that I rarely think state of the board alone equals the state of the game, but in perfect information, 2-player classics, that equation does apply. Now, we get to the story that resulted in this screencast. In some blog comments, a poster described Britannia without naming it, implying that it was a puzzle just like any other game, quote unquote. My response was, the most successful players recognize that it's about persuading people to do things to your advantage and about not letting them persuade you to do something that's to your disadvantage. That's not like a puzzle at all. But part of the commenter's response was, quote, the board state is the board state. No persuasion is necessary. I can certainly assume that my opponents will make suboptimal plays, but that's a poor starting point for a discussion on game strategy, unquote. This makes sense if the game is a perfect information game, that is to say, a puzzle. A perfect information game with 2 players, not with more than 2. Because once you introduce a 3rd player, then all kinds of uncertainties result. Well, I was dumbfounded by the depth of ignorance of that response, because the poster was assuming that all games were like 2-player perfect information games. In any game where players are able to significantly help or hinder others, and there are more than 2 players, persuasion is going to be a vital part of the game, or it will be unless the players refuse to participate. I know there are people who think games should not involve any kind of negotiation or persuasion, while to others it's a major point of games. To me, the people who think there should be no negotiation or persuasion tend to be the people who really wish they could play alone and not even have one opponent, let alone more. They don't want to be bothered by the other players. I don't know, but I suspect the commenter would agree with the statement which I have seen several people make, quote, all games are math, unquote. My view is that games are about people, and if anything is about math, it's puzzles. Yes, chess and checkers are puzzles, although they are too complex for humans to solve completely. If you cut them down a bit, for example in chess problems, then they can be solved exactly. Negotiation is important if you have more than 2 players, and if the players can affect each other. I recall in particular one tournament Britannia player who refused to negotiate. Now this guy had won the tournament many years ago, more than 20 years ago. He asked me what he could do to be more successful, and I told him as long as he took that stance that he wouldn't negotiate, he was outnumbered 3-1. Now, secret negotiation is prohibited in Britannia, but you cannot practically outlaw negotiation, because any comment a player makes about the game, even a look the player casts upon some part of the game, can be a form of persuasion. The extreme of game negotiation is the classic 7-player diplomacy. It's not a point game, only the end state matters. The state of the board will tell you a lot about how things are going, but it won't tell you what alliances are in effect or may be about to occur or fail. That's in the heads of the players and nowhere else. Warfare in general is like this. Warfare is full of uncertainty, as observed by many such as Sun Tzu and Clausewitz. Given that uncertainty, how can a board state alone tell you all you need to know? It's ridiculous. The best generals are often those who read their opponent's intentions, which is sometimes called yomi, and take advantage of them. The more the board state tells you, the closer the game is to a puzzle. Is that true? I'm not confident to make a generalization about that yet, but I suspect that I will. The more the board state tells you, the closer the game is to a puzzle. Thanks for listening.